For more on the war in Ukraine, CBS News national security correspondent David Martin joins us now from the Pentagon. Hi, David. Thanks for joining us. We're nearly 2 weeks into this conflict, and the Pentagon initially predicted that things would be over much quicker for the Ukrainians. They said that the Russian military might be able to take Kyiv in just a few days. So what has the weaknesses of the Russian military told the world about the Russian capability?
Well, that it's not all it's cracked up to be, and I'll bet you that Vladimir Putin is finding this out for the first time as well. That was actually not an American prediction that Kyiv would fall in 2 days and the rest of the country in 2 weeks. That was the battle plan that the Russian military sold to Putin and that the U.S. somehow got hold of. But they have proved very inept at land warfare. There have been cases in which entire columns of tanks have simply run out of gas, and we've seen those satellite photos of that resupply convoy strung out along a road for 40 miles with unable to go forward, unable to go backward. But it's more than just resupply. The Russians are not very good, it turns out, at coordinating their air and ground operations. So instead of concentrating all your firepower at the point of attack, they are just attacking in piecemeal, and the Ukrainians are able to beat them back. And finally, the Russians appear not willing to take risks. When they see an opening, or at least what looks like an opening to U.S. officials, they just don't go for it. They sit there and hunker down and wait for reinforcements, and the result is that they just are in this grinding warfare. But after saying all that, I have to point out that a senior defense official said today that Russia still retains 95% of its combat power. So this may be a stalled force, but it's not a spent force.
With that in mind, David, so the New York Times reported that the U.S. and NATO allies supplied Ukraine with 17,000 anti-tank weapons. What are you hearing about that, and what kind of difference they might be making on the battlefield?
Well, there are a bunch of different tank weapons involved here, and the high-end one is called the Javelin. It's made in the United States, and it is able to destroy a tank. The operator simply gets the tank in its sight at 2,000 yards, fires the missile, and then he can duck for cover, and the missile does the rest. And what it does is it pops up to about 150 feet, and then it dives down on the top of the tank, which is where it has the least armor. Now, there are lots of other anti-tank weapons out there that can't destroy a tank, but they can disable it by, say, knocking off a tread. And when the Russian tank crew comes out to try and find out what the problem is, then they expose themselves to gunfire by the Ukrainians.
David, there's a lot of confusion today around this Polish plan to supply the Ukrainians with fighter jets. What's the latest, and are we talking about enough jets to really change the dynamic in the skies above Ukraine?
Well, the latest is it sounds like the Poles have pulled a fast one on the U.S. They announced, without apparently telling the U.S. they were going to do it, that they were willing to transfer all of their MiGs, MiG-29s, to a U.S. Air Force base in Ramstein, Germany. And the plan apparently would be for Ukrainian pilots then go to Germany to this U.S. base, pick up the MiGs, and fly them back into Ukraine. You know, that comes awfully close to military intervention by the U.S., and it's a tough decision to make. I mean, Ukraine obviously could use the MiGs. Its pilots know how to fly MiG-29s, and control of the airspace over Ukraine will be critical to determining the outcome of the battle on the ground. But flying MiG-29s straight from a U.S. base in Germany into Ukraine, you don't know what kind of response that would provoke from Vladimir Putin, and it might end up doing the one thing President Biden is determined not to do, which is letting the U.S. get dragged into this war. So this is a very tough decision.
And just very quickly, David, why would the Poles do that? If they're going to supply the jets to the Ukrainian military, why not just tell them to come pick up the jets in Poland?
Because they don't want to expose themselves to possible attack from Russia. If they provided the planes directly, then they could be accused of having intervened in the war in Ukraine. So this plan would essentially use the Americans as middlemen to bear the onus of the decision.
All right, David Martin at the Pentagon for us. David, as always, we thank you for your insight and reporting.
Sure thing.